All right. Now, we carry on. Amos. And when we ended last week, we were looking at chapter 5, verses 18 to 20. And there we see that the Israelites who lived in rebellion to God, they were just ignoring His will for their lives, and yet they had so deceived themselves about the matter that they actually longed for His coming in judgment. They desired His coming in judgment. They thought it was going to be a good thing for them. They thought His coming in judgment would be a time of vindication and reward, but God tells them in no uncertain terms that they have no business hoping for that day. His coming judgment is going to be a disaster for them. It's going to be their destruction and ruin, not their vindication and reward. And as I said right when we ended last week, that many religious people today are in the same boat. They're living in rebellion to God, being oblivious of or apathetic toward His commands, and still think that the second coming, that the return of Jesus Christ is going to be a time of rejoicing and celebration for them. We read in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, there where Jesus made clear that lip service, saying, Lord, Lord, with nothing behind it, that lip service from a rebel will not cut it on the day of judgment. And that point is echoed in Luke 6:46 to 49, where He says, why do you call me Lord, Lord? Why do you say that and do not do what I tell you? Doesn't saying I'm Lord carry with it the notion that you will do what I say if I'm Lord? So it says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke out against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears my words, who hears and does not do them, is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. I mean, in numerous texts, Jesus and the Spirit stress that obedience to commands is an inherent part of loving Jesus and God the Father. You see that in many places. The Spirit speaking through the Apostle John. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments in John 14:15. 14:21, whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. John 14:23, Jesus said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. 14:24, whoever does not love me does not keep my words. 15:14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. 1 John 2:3, and by this we know that we have come to know him if we keep his commandments. 1 John 5:3, for this is the love of God that we keep his commandments. So this idea, you see, that this notion of living in rebellion to God and thinking that that's fine, thinking that that's how they were. And I'm telling you that there are many people today who are in that same boat. And then God says in Amos 5:21 to 24, I hate, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. but let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Now you might think to yourself, you might wonder, how can people who are living in rebellion to God, how can they possibly think they're right with God? How can that possibly be? That they're living in rebellion, rejecting God's will, and yet still long for His coming in judgment. They think they're right with God. How could they possibly have a false sense of security? Like the person who flees from the lion, he thinks he's safe. The person who gets into his house, he thinks he's safe. How can they possibly have a false sense of security in that situation? And at least part of the answer is right here. In verses 21 to 24, a source of their false security with God was their religious ritual. That was a source of their false security. They thought they could be justified before God by performing acts of worship without surrendering control of their lives to Him. They offered God religious festivals, solemn assemblies, songs, and sacrifices, all of those things, proclaiming that God was worthy of being honored, worthy of being obeyed, but then they ignored His will for their lives. They ignored His will for their lives. They lived as they wanted. They lived as they saw fit, rather than as God wanted. And God says He despises this type of hypocritical worship. He wants genuine worship. Sure, He wants worship. But He wants genuine worship. He wants worship that emanates from a faith that finds expression in one's life. He wants worship from people who really love and trust and have their faith in Him and are surrendered to Him. He doesn't want it from hypocrites and posers and pretenders. That's not worship at all. That's not worship. He wants it from those who are surrendered. He wants it those who have faith, a faith that produces a life of justice and righteousness. And you see precisely that same sentiment expressed not just here. You see it in a number of places in the Old Testament. For example, in Proverbs 15:8, the sacrifice of the wicked. So here's a guy living the way he wants, living however he wants, disobeying God, but he comes and he's going to offer sacrifice to God. And he says the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. It's an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is acceptable to Him. Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 9 to 11. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord. And perhaps most famously in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 10 to 17, hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah. Now he's speaking to Judah and to Jerusalem. Sodom and Gomorrah are gone. He's talking to Judah and Jerusalem and talking to them that way because of their sinfulness. And he says, what to me is the multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord. I've had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. So here we see in the people of Israel in Amos are living the way they want to live. And you wonder, how in the world can that be? And what I'm saying to you is, this is something that people here, they are depending on their ritual and they're thinking that God is satisfied with that. Our ability to deceive ourselves in this regard is greater than we imagine. I've told the story before. I'll never forget. One night, it was probably around 8 years before John and I became Christians. And we were out with a mutual friend named Dominic. And we were drinking. And we were working hard to achieve the desired state of drunkenness. It was Christmas Eve. And about 11:45, Dominic gets up and starts to leave the bar. And John and I said to him, "Where are you going?" He said, "To midnight mass." Now, it should strike you as absurd. It should strike you as absurd that somebody could think God would be pleased with acts of devotion that are offered to him by one who is defying his commands about drunkenness. It should strike you as absurd. But what about the person who's devoted to pornography? Or who's carrying on an immoral sexual relationship? Having sex with someone to whom he or she is not married. What about that person who sings praises to God on Sunday morning? What about the person who persists in lying, hating, slandering, and refusing to forgive, but who wouldn't think of missing the Lord's Supper? What about the person who's cheating his customers or his employees, stealing from his employer, or cheating his way through school, but who praises God in prayer and asks for his blessings? What about the person who's accepted or made peace with his obscene or profane speech, but who gives money every time the collection plate comes by? You see, we have a great capacity for deceiving ourselves about this. Now, I'm not, of course, talking about people who struggle with sin the way we all struggle with sin. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about those who harbor their sin, who refuse to surrender their sins, who refuse to confess them, to renounce them, to commit themselves to no longer practicing them. I'm talking to the person and about the person who has made an idol of his sin. I'm talking to the rebel who thinks he's convinced God to be happy with trinkets, to be satisfied with tokens of devotion. And the truth of the matter is that God hates any worship that is offered to him by a pretender, by a hypocrite, by one who has not surrendered control of his life, by one who is a rebel but who says with his lips, Lord, Lord. See, this is treating him as though he can be played. It's treating God as though his favor can be bought with mere rituals, as was the case of pagan gods. That's what you're doing in that, you see. The predicate for all acceptable worship, the necessary, essential predicate for all acceptable worship is a genuine faith, which includes a surrender of one's will. It is a genuine faith, a broken spirit and contrite heart. That is the predicate, you see, from which all worship emanates. It's only then that the worship God prescribes is pleasing and acceptable to him. Otherwise, these things, he says, I got enough of the blood in the old covenant. You see, he would say that I've got enough songs. What I want is a genuine expression of your devotion to me pouring out in worship. Then it's wonderful. You see, then it's wonderful. And that's what you see here in Amos and what he's saying. Amos in 5:25-27. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You have taken up Sikkuth, your king, and Kayun, your star god, your images that you made for yourselves. And I will send you into exile beyond Damascus, says the Lord, whose name is the God of hosts. Now it's debatable here in verse 26 whether 26 refers to these specific pagan astral deities, whether it's a proper name of these deities, Sikkuth and Kayun, whether that's how it should be rendered, or whether it should be rendered the way the NIV does, where he says, you have lifted up the shrine of your king, the pedestal of your idols, the star of your God. So there's a question about how to go with that. Most English versions go with the way the ESV is done and taking Sikkuth and Kayun as proper names of astral deities. But either way, the verse is clearly speaking of Israel's involvement in idolatry during the wilderness period. So either way you look at it, it's talking about that. And as Stephen indicates in his rehearsal of Israel's history in Acts chapter 7, Stephen citing verses 42 and in verses 42 and 43 of Acts 7, he cites the Septuagint rendering of this text in Amos, and Israel was worshiping idols in the wilderness. You see that in Stephen's rehearsal of Israel's history, in addition to the golden calf. And you can also look in Exodus 20:10-26, Hosea 9:10, Psalm 106:28. So this idea of this idolatry in the wilderness period is there, and it's suggesting through the rhetorical question, he says, did you bring me sacrifices and offerings during the 40 years in the wilderness? The understood answer to that is no, and what he's suggesting is that Israel did not bring him sacrifices and offering in the wilderness. And what I think he's saying is that their divided heart, their lack of singular devotion to them as evidenced by their idolatry during that period, that their lack of singular devotion to him, that vitiated whatever sacrifices they were offering. It made them of no effect because God doesn't care about worship that is given to him by somebody who doesn't love him and isn't devoted to him. So this is what he's talking about here. Did you bring me? I have no doubt they're doing this, but they're vitiated because you have a divided heart. You're worshiping idols. Well, you're worshiping idols. Don't come burning stuff to me. You see, don't come giving me that like, oh, I love you over here. And then, by the way, here, you take this. No. That's not how God rolls, we would say. He calls for everything from you. Now you give him that, and then everything is just pleasing You see, it's this rich aroma. And God declares that their current disobedience, you see where he says in 27, I will send you into exile beyond Damascus. He declares that their current disobedience and disloyalty, that is going to be judged. He's going to send them into exile in Assyria beyond Damascus. So that's what he's going to do. And then he says in 6, 1-7, woe to those who are at ease in Zion, and to those who feel secure on the mountain of Samaria, the notable men of the first of the nations, to whom the house of Israel comes. Pass over to Calneh and see, and from there go to Hamath the Great, then go down to Gath of the Philippines. Are they better than these kingdoms? Or is their territory greater than your territory? And what I think is being done there is the notable men to whom the people of Israel come, they are telling them that. That's why I had to modify the ESV there. But he says, or you who put far away the day of disaster and bring near the seat of violence. Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp and like David invent for themselves instruments of music, who drink wine in bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore, they shall now be the first of those who go into exile, and the revelry of those who stretch themselves out shall pass away. So here, in this oracle of judgment, Amos includes a word here against Judah. Okay, he's been focusing on Israel, but here he includes a word against Judah, warning those who are at ease in Zion, in Jerusalem. You see, they were spiritually complacent. They were spiritually complacent, and he's already indicated in chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, judgment was coming on Judah too. So he mentions them here again. And then regarding Israel, the woe is addressed to the leaders who felt safe and secure in the city, the capital city of Samaria, a city that was difficult to conquer militarily because it's situated on a mountain, and who were sought out. He directs it here. He addresses the leaders who felt safe and secure there, and leaders who were sought out by and depended upon by the people. And the leaders of Israel, they were giving false assurances to the people. See, they were pointing out Israel's and Judah's greatness in comparison to some of their neighbors. In verse 2, it's best understood in my judgment, verse 2, as an instruction and rhetorical questions by Israel's leaders to its people that included a reference to Judah as a nation of fellow Jews. And what they're saying, they say, look, are they, Calneh, Hamath, Gath, are they better than these kingdoms, Israel and Judah? You see, I'm trying to say, listen, look how big time we are. You come in here, you people are seeking me out. So look, everything's cool. Just go look at these people. Are they better than we are? No. Is their territory greater than? No. All right, man, we're in the catbird seat. You see, trying to convince them they have nothing to be concerned about. That's what I think is going on here. You see, are they better? Is their territory greater than Israel's territory? The answer to both these things is no. And at that time, in fact, Calneh and Hamath were under the control of Israel, and Gath was under the control of Judah. But that's what I think is happening there. So you have these leaders to whom the people of Israel come, and they're trying to pacify them, say, you don't have anything to worry about. Look how big time we are compared to these other people. Okay, so they're trying to assuage any concerns that they have. And in their self-confidence and their misplaced trust in empty religious ritual, they dismissed, you see, or they put far away any claims of a coming day of disaster. That's what they're doing. They're saying, look at us. Look, so they're putting far away the truth that God is coming in judgment. They don't want the people to be thinking about that. All the while. So they're dismissing the truth of God's coming judgment, putting that far away. All the while they bring near, as the NIV renders it, a reign of terror. Or as the New English translation, New Revised, a reign of violence. In other words, they're telling them, don't worry about judgment, but they're bringing a reign of violence on their own people through injustice and oppression. The whole time, you see, and you say, well, what does it mean when it says a seat of violence? And why does the NIV and these other things say a reign? And the way that, what's going on there is seat is taken as a reference to a throne. You see, so a reign, it's a throne of violence, and violence there is this reign of terror that they're bringing on their own people. So what are they doing? They're saying, no, don't listen to this idea. Don't worry about God coming in judgment. Look how nicely situated we are. Look how big we are. Look how powerful we are. Just compare. Is their territory bigger than you? Nah. They're doing that at the same time, dismissing that, at the same time bringing a reign of terror on their own people through injustice and oppression. And so this is what's going on. And he pronounces a woe on those who are wallowing in luxury. That's what all this talk is here about that. He says, whoa, beds of ivory. They've got all kinds of stuff to eat. They've got idle time. They can just hang out. You know, normal people then weren't doing that. They had to work. And so they're sitting here just chilling. They're loaded. Their wealth that they've made off the backs of people, exploiting them, cheating them. And so the good times are rolling. They've got all the food they want. They're just hanging out. They're listening to music. They're idle. And he pronounces this woe on these people who are living in luxury, who have all kinds of leisure time, but who do not care. They do not care about the moral rot of the nation. That's why he says to drink wine in bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils. They are living the high life, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. That's Israel. They're not grieved. They don't care. I've got mine. Life is going fine. And they don't care a thing about that. They carry on, you see, like nothing's wrong. God's people have turned their backs on him. And they couldn't care less. They were living large. So who cares about how God is being treated? Who cares about how God is being mocked? How God is being disrespected? I'm living large. I think about some huge church. I could see this. You'd have a big church, wealthy church. You know, a measure of, well, no, we're really doing well while we've got people living in sin and doing. Is that doing well? Is having a big church with a big budget, is that the measure of a church? Or is loyalty to God the measure of a church? All right, yeah, I think the answer is pretty clear. And I could see the same thing, you see. These things are part of what humans struggle with. And so Amos brings these out in the context of the Old Testament. He says, they won't be saved by their wealth, their livestock, their land holdings, their bank accounts. Those things will not exempt them from God's judgment. On the contrary, they're going to be the first to go. They're going to be the first ones to go. Not because of their wealth. Not because of their wealth, but because of their callousness toward God. That's why they're going to be the first to go. Donald Gowan says in his commentary, he says, neither the book of Amos nor the rest of the Old Testament, however, advocates asceticism. The claim that giving up pleasure will in itself make one better. Israel saw pleasure as one of the good gifts for which God is to be thanked. And that includes plenty to eat and drink and comfort and security. The attitudes of some Christians that discomfort is protection from temptation, and that wealth in itself is something to feel guilty about, do not correspond to the Old Testament outlook. Luxury is a problem when it is gained at the expense of others' misery, and when it deadens the mind and the senses to responsibility. As long as I'm comfortable, why disturb that comfort by worrying about my behavior or about others who are not doing so well? You see, so it's easy to slip into the idea and to read Amos and say, no, he's anti-wealth. He's not anti-wealth. He's pro-God. You see? And those who have these things, who rejoice in them or whatever, and say, look, this is a blessing from God. I give him glory for it. I manage the things that he's given me in a way that I hope brings him glory. So it is not wealth per se, but you understand that wealth per se, that wealth winds up, it's a threat. Let me put it that way. It is something that has to be handled very carefully. Okay? Because it will deaden your heart to responsibilities. And it will, so you stop worrying about my behavior because I start trusting in that. Why my life goes the way it does is because I have a large bank account. You see, instead of God, it's God. And that's what he's after. And so here in Israel, you have people who are wealthy who have exploited and abused and cheated the poor. And they're living off their backs and don't care. Don't care. They think all is well. He says in 6:8-14, the Lord God has sworn by himself, declares the Lord, the God of hosts. I abhor the pride of Jacob and hate his strongholds. And I will deliver up the city and all that is in it. And if 10 men remain in one house, they shall die. And when one's relative, the one who anoints him for burial, shall take him up to bring the bones out of the house, and shall say to him who's in the innermost parts of the house, is there still anyone with you? He shall say, no. And he shall say, silence. We must not mention the name of the Lord. For behold, the Lord commands, and the great house shall be struck down into fragments, and the little house into bits. Do horses run on rocks? Does one plow there with oxen? But you've turned justice into poison, and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. You who rejoice in Lodabar, who say, have we not by our own strength captured Karnaim for ourselves? For behold, I will raise up against you a nation, O house of Israel, declares the Lord, the God of hosts, and they shall oppress you from Lebo Hamath to the brook of the Arabah. So here we have the people here in Israel. You see their attitude and their heart. God's judgment against rebellious Israel is sure. His judgment is sure. He hates their pride and their military strongholds in which they trust. You see, that's where their trust was. It's the same thing you can do with money and everything. My real trust is in the military might. We've got strongholds. Nobody can mess with us. If your trust is not in God, your trust is illusory. Okay? You're trusting in a phantom. Because if God is not with you, if He is not protecting you, there is no stronghold that will keep you safe. There is no bank account big enough to keep you safe. Well, He hates their pride and their military strongholds that they trust in, and He swears by Himself that He will deliver up Samaria. And the judgment on the impenitent, when I think of this, the judgment on the impenitent at the return of Christ is no less sure. 2 Thessalonians 1, 5, and 10, just to pick one example. Where Paul says, he said, the Spirit of God, through Paul, says, this is evidence of the righteous judgment of God, so that you will be considered worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you also are suffering. Since it is a righteous thing in the presence of God to repay affliction to the ones afflicting you, and rest to you along with us who are being afflicted. This will happen at the revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ from heaven with His mighty angels, in flaming fire, when He metes out punishment to those who do not know God, those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. They will pay a penalty of eternal destruction, separated from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might, when he comes on that day to be glorified in his saints and to be marveled at by all who have believed, and therefore by you, because our testimony to you was believed. So when he sits here and he tells Israel, I am bringing judgment on you, and I think about God as saying this judgment is sure. Well, he has told us that his judgment on the impenitent at the return of Christ is sure. And he illustrates the coming judgment as something that is so grave, something that is so horrific, that the occupants who survive the first wave of the judgment, they will end up dying in their own homes, perhaps by starvation or an ensuing plague. And a family member who comes to retrieve the body of one who's died in the house, he finds a lone individual in the innermost part of the house, either the last survivor of those that stayed there after the first assault. He's either the last survivor there or someone who's entered the house after people there have died. He's entered the house in the hope of hiding from God's judgment. And the family member asked this person, this lone person in the innermost part of the house, if there's anybody with him. And after answering no, the man urges him not to mention the Lord's name in prayer or in lamentation of grief. Do not utter. And the point seems to be that the punishment of God's judgment is so severe that he fears that calling on the Lord's name will bring another wave of wrath. Shh! Don't say it. It's like being... Don't. Okay, that's why I say, when God comes in judgment, going to be none of this. Amen. None of that. Going to be this. Okay? And that's what I see. This guy here is going, man, when God comes in judgment, it's serious business. It's serious business. Now, they've done the unthinkable. They've done the unthinkable. That's what he's talking about here when he says here, do horses run on rocks? Does one plow there? Well, that's unthinkable. Okay? And they've done the unthinkable, turning justice into poison. That's who they are. That's what they're doing. Justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. And they boast in their victories as though those things came by their own strength, which is another temptation. All right. Okay, good. So you see that when we work, we go and we do things and we work and we say, okay, I did that. That's mine. Okay? And when you start doing that and think that, you have to recognize that everything like that, whatever they achieved was by God, they don't see it that way. If you had a victory there, who do you think gave you that victory? And so they're saying, no, it's me, baby. It's me. I don't care. You see, I treat God this way, and look what's happening to me. I'm out here conquering all these things, and God's just waiting. He's just waiting. So you see them doing that. But God's judgment is coming. You see, he says he's going to bring the Assyrians against them. He's going to bring the Assyrians, a nation that will conquer them. Now, the judgment at the return of Christ, when you see how this judgment is described, how extreme, how difficult, how terrifying this judgment is described, as God is going to bring the Assyrians on Israel, and did. You see that, and you just look at how the judgment at the return of Christ is described in even more frightening terms. I do not do you any favor by hiding that from you, by sitting here and pretending this isn't all over the Bible, that I know better than God what people need to hear. What do you see? Matthew 13, 49 and 50, so it'll be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's happening. Just like Israel sat and heard and then experienced, God is saying, this is how it's going to be. You see in Matthew 25, 31, 40 to 34, 41 and 46. Read the whole thing. But I've just pulled out what's essential for the point I'm making to you. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory. This is Jesus. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. He says this. You see in Revelation 14, 9 through 11, the suffering in the eternal fire that is prepared for the devil and his angels, the fire of eternal punishment into which the unsaved will be cast, is portrayed in Revelation 14, 9 through 11, with reference to the unfaithful at the end time. You see, so we get a portrayal of it in reference to the unfaithful at the end time, the time of Antichrist. And it says, and another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night. These worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Now, this is a place you don't want to be. Okay? I've told you before. So, well, I think that's imagery. I do too. I think it's imagery. But you can't bleed out of the imagery what the imagery intends to convey. And what the imagery intends to convey is it's a nightmare. It is the worst possible thing you can experience. It is something you want to do anything to avoid. So that's what he winds up saying. And this eternal, give me just a second. This eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This fire into which Jesus says in Matthew 25, 41 that the unsaved will be cast. It is described in Revelation 20:10 as the lake of fire in which the devil, the beast, and the false prophet are tormented day and night, forever and ever. And Revelation 20:15 confirms that the unsaved, those whose names are not found in the book of life, also are thrown into the lake of fire. Do not want to be there. And God is telling us, as he told Israel, and says, listen, we see the description, and I say the description that God is giving us of the judgment is worse than that. It's worse than that, so it's sound the alarm, baby. That's what it is. Tell people. Trying to cover this up because it makes Jesus look bad. Nonsense. Thanks for coming. Okay, that's why I say, when God comes in judgment, going to be none of this. Amen. None of that. Going to be this. Amen. Okay? And that's what I see.